It was a hot, hot summer and plenty of plants died. But in today's video, I want to give you a garden tour and show you the champions of my summer garden. Those plants that didn't mind the heat and kept on growing through all those crazy hot temperatures. I'm Angela from Growing in the Garden. My garden is in Mesa, Arizona in Zone 9B, and I love sharing garden inspiration and helpful tips so you can be successful in your garden. This loofah started the summer as a couple of seeds I put in the ground, and look at it now. It has overtaken this trellis. It gets full afternoon sun and it just keeps on growing. All I have to do is keep tucking these vines where they need to go. And I just noticed today the very first female blossom, so I'm so excited. That means we'll have loofahs growing soon. So because this is the first blossom and I want to make sure that it gets pollinated, I'm going to go ahead and hand pollinate this blossom. The easiest way to do that is by removing a male blossom, and you can see the difference because it has a skinny stem instead of a stem that looks like the fruit that it's going to become. And I'm going to pull back these petals and transfer that pollen to the female blossom. You can tell this is a female blossom because it has the thicker stem. That's what's going to turn into the loofah. The male blossoms are on a thin stem, and on loofah you often see those blossoms in clusters like this. Well, they'll bloom right after another, so there'll be lots and lots of male flowers and not as many female flowers. I probably didn't need to worry about it because I've got lots of bees helping me out, but I wanted to make sure this first blossom gets pollinated. Another summer champion has been basil. I have several different varieties of basil growing throughout the garden, and it's continued to grow really well. Normally I keep my basil cut back, but when I cut it back, that exposes new leaves to the sunlight, and because it's been so hot, I haven't cut it back as much as I normally do. You can see all of these blossoms all over. The bees haven't minded, they've enjoyed the extra blossoms, and I've still been able to harvest the basil that I've needed from lower down in the plants. This variety of basil is a Genovese basil, a basic Italian variety that's delicious, used in cooking all the time. One of my favorite varieties. This is cinnamon basil. It smells so good. Has a little bit of a spicier flavor than typical basil, and you can see when it flowers it gets these beautiful spikes here. The bees love these too. And if you leave these spikes in place, this darker portion is where the seeds form, right inside there. If you're going to save seed from basil, let that dry fully on the plant, and then you'll have plenty of seeds to save and share. If I had to choose a favorite basil, Emerald Towers basil would be it. Look at how it's growing. I haven't pruned it, and yet it's growing up nice and tall, no flowers. I can continue to harvest off this plant as much as I need to, and the square foot gardener in me loves it. It stays nice and tidy in one little square. Another favorite is lemon. I wish you could smell this. It smells so good. So imagine that your basil has fresh lemon zest all over it. That's what lemon basil smells and tastes like. I let it flower as well, and the bees love it, but the flavor and taste is so good. Another variety that I love to grow is holy basil. The flowers grow in a little bit different way, and it's a slightly different variety, but it's still delicious. Has a lot of really good medicinal properties as well. Seeds form in these pods right along here. There's the seeds for next year's plant. Lots of varieties of basil, but they all survived the summer. Because it was so hot, there were some empty spaces that opened up when plants died. What I tried to do this summer is to plant cover crops in those areas. This is one of my favorite cover crops. These are black-eyed peas. These are planted from seed just a few weeks ago. They grow quickly, filling up this area with lots of green. A couple weeks before I plant, I'm going to trim these off at the base and lay them as a living mulch, and they'll decompose and add organic matter to the soil. The best time to cut them back is just before they flower, but if they flower and a couple of peas form, that's no big deal. I started growing sesame last year, and it will forever be a part of my summer garden. It thrives in the heat, and the blossoms attract the bees and pollinators. It's been a beautiful plant to grow, and the best part, the end of the season, I have homegrown sesame seeds with so much flavor. The blossoms form along this stem, and then the sesame seeds develop in each one of these pods. As the pods turn brown, you can tell the seeds are getting ready. This year I'm growing black sesame seeds. When you think of gardening during a hot summer, okra is one of those crops that comes to mind, and okra didn't disappoint this summer. Got these 3 plants at the end of this bed. They receive full afternoon sun, and they just kept producing all summer long. In fact, we've got some branching, more okra forming down here. Someone asked, how long do okra plants last? Will they keep producing? And they will keep going until it gets cold. We like eating okra and we'll eat it throughout the summer, but I found a great way to use up all of the extra okra that comes out of the garden, okra water. It's easy to make, really nutritious, and a lot of health benefits. I have a recipe on my blog and I'll link to it right here. Another heat lover is eggplant. This produced fruit all summer long. I couldn't believe it. I really had to keep an eye on it and keep things harvested because it would ripen really quickly in the heat. The passion flower vine was a champion this summer. It looks a little bit worse for the wear, but it has withstood a really hot summer. I'm leaving it alone right now, but I'll probably cut it back a little bit once we get cooler temperatures. We've been harvesting fruit and seeds off of this all season. So because I'm harvesting this for the seeds and not necessarily for the flavor, I leave them on the vine as long as possible. And this is what it looks like on the inside. Look at that. And I've been saving the seeds to plant next year and share with others. And it tastes okay. My chickens actually really like it. Here you go. I love having flowers in the garden, and this summer 2 flowers really stood out. One of them, zinnias. Look how beautiful these blooms are. You'd never know that they had been through such a hot summer. I haven't done a lot with these. Again, I'm hesitant to cut a lot back when it's so hot outside. So I really just kind of let them do their thing, and they have been beautiful. I am definitely saving seeds from these zinnias. This is a little bit smaller variety. Aren't these blooms so cute? Looks like I've got a few seeds here that are ready to harvest. You want to leave them on the plant as long as possible. Look at that. Yeah, we've got some nice seeds here. Another flower that has done amazingly well this summer is gomphrena. I knew it loved the heat, and so I was really happy to see it come through this summer like a champ. Got several different varieties growing throughout my garden. Strawberry fields, ping pong lavender, white gomphrena. I love the pop of color that it brings, and there's been food for the pollinators all summer long. Roselle is in the okra family and loves the heat. It's crazy to think that this entire plant came from just one seed. Be careful where you plant Roselle because hopefully it's going to get huge. My favorite part about Roselle though has got to be the blooms and the fruit. In early fall, you'll see the blossoms develop, followed by the fruit. It's delicious in tea, jams. We even make our family's Thanksgiving cranberry sauce out of Roselle. One thing you definitely want to keep in mind when you're planting Roselle is that these plants get large, and they often get large during monsoon season when we get heavy winds. So it's really important to give them some support. I like to pound a post into place and then support that main trunk so that it can stay secure during heavy winds. The branches get really heavy too once they're laden down with fruit, so having that extra support in the middle can make all the difference. If a branch breaks off, I put it in the chicken coop and they eat every single leaf. Sweet potatoes are another favorite. I love planting them at the base of Roselle so that that space doesn't go wasted. While the plant's small, that plant continues to grow in the bed. By the time the plant is large, the plants have definitely left the bed and are sprawling all over the garden. Another reason Roselle and sweet potatoes are one of my favorite companion plantings is that they're both ready for harvest at about the same time. After I've harvested the Roselle and taken out the sweet potatoes, it's perfect timing to add in some cool season plants. Summer gardening in Arizona means that we skirt the edge and push the limits of what can grow successfully during the summer. The cantaloupe vines grew a lot slower than normal. I like to grow mine vertically, and I didn't get as many fruit throughout the summer as I normally do. But I'm happy to see that with cooler temperatures, production is picking back up. This plant has been attacked relentlessly by birds this summer. I think they're thirsty. so I haven't minded too much because they've left the fruit alone. It's not hard to tell when cantaloupe is ready. It is going to tell you when it's ready to be picked, and this one is screaming that it's time to pick. The easiest way to tell is that they slip off easily from the vine. The other ways that you can tell that cantaloupe is ready is that they start to change from green to this nice yellow color, and the ribbing's gonna get more pronounced. And a cantaloupe that's ripe usually smells pretty good too. Cantaloupe doesn't get any sweeter once it's picked, but it will soften. So peppers are another plant that struggled a little bit more than they normally do during the summer. Even though there was some production and maybe some fruit on the plants, the fruit would get sunburned and even rot and cook on the plants. So it was a tough year for peppers. Fortunately, most of the plants survived. So what I've been looking for in my plants is new growth lower in the stem. Once I see that new growth, I cut the plants back to that point, and then I'm getting a flush of new growth like you see here on this plant. So even though it was a tough summer for peppers, I think we're still gonna get lots of fruit this fall. It was a tough summer for tomatoes. Out of all of my tomato plants, only 2 survived. These yellow pear tomatoes. They're starting to push out new growth, and I see some blossoms forming. So I'm hoping that they will come through and begin producing. Because I lost so many tomatoes this summer, I didn't want to skip my monsoon planting of tomatoes. This year, I'm focusing on a lot of dwarf varieties of tomatoes. Indeterminate tomato plants can get really large and are often hard to manage, but dwarf varieties have the same size fruit on a smaller size plant. So I'm trying lots of different varieties this year to see the ones that we like. Smaller varieties mean I can add them to other areas of my garden that don't have a trellis, and I can plant more in the same area. I've planted 6 different dwarf varieties in this bed, and I'll be adding some herbs and flowers to this bed as companion plants soon. Because I have this nice big trellis right here, I also wanted to plant some indeterminate tomatoes. Everyone's favorite tomato is sun gold, so I had to add a few of those. So I've got 2 sun golds planted right here, and another couple of indeterminate tomatoes planted right here. Indeterminate varieties of tomatoes means that the plant can grow and grow and grow. So you definitely want to have some support in place when you plant. Before you know it, these plants are going to fill up this trellis. I can't wait. So because I've had an issue with birds here in this part of the garden, I have protected these smaller plants with cloches until they outgrow it. This will protect the leaves and keep them away from the birds. Starting seeds indoors can seem intimidating, but if you practice, this skill is going to save you a lot of money. I have learned to love starting seeds indoors. Look for a seed starting mix. It's going to be light and fluffy, really easy for those seeds to germinate. And when I've got that seed starting mix, I like to mix in some worm castings. They add in a lot of benefits. Disease fighting, they give them some nutrition, really giving these plants off to a good start with the combination of seed starting mix and worm castings. So I mix that together. Then I like to pre-moisten. It's easy to get it too wet, which is why I do it in a container with some holes so some of that extra moisture can drain out. But I like for that mixture to absorb some of that moisture, make sure that it gets wet all throughout the mixture. You can see those dry clumps in there. That's what I'm trying to avoid in the seed starting mix by pre-moistening it, making sure all of that soil is nice and wet. That will help the seeds germinate a lot better. I just add in a little bit of water at a time. Trying to get a nice consistency here. All right, nothing like getting your hands in the dirt. I love this part, actually. It's good for the soul. Get your hands dirty. So then I'm gonna take my pots, and I wanna fill them all the way up with soil, give those plants the best start. There might be faster ways to do this, but I really love just using just one by one, getting these pots filled up, making sure they're full of good soil. I invested in these containers 3 or 4 years ago, and I've used them every season since. So it's nice to be able to reuse the same supplies each year. They've held up pretty well. I don't store them outside, and I think that helps. Right now I'm planting broccoli seeds and statice seeds. And it's important to look at your seed packet for some key information. The most important thing right now is knowing how deep to plant these seeds. It's also important to know if that seed requires light for germination. Broccoli seeds are little, and so they don't need to go very deep. Then I like to make a little indent with this dibber where I'm going to plant the seeds. Then I carefully grab 2 seeds, usually try and sow a couple in each cell, drop them in that hole, and then put the soil on top. Broccoli is one of those crops that I like to succession plant or plant a few every week or so. That way that broccoli is going to ripen at different times and I don't have all my broccoli ripe at the same time. And don't forget to add the label. I like to put the name of the plant and the date that I'm planting it right there at the end of the row. Last year was my first year growing statice, and I'm definitely adding it to my garden again. The plants are beautiful, and I made wreaths and dried arrangements with all of those flowers. So here's what statice seeds look like. Statice seeds are also little, but light helps them germinate. So I don't want these statice seeds to be sown too deeply. So I'm going to put 1 or 2 right on top of the soil and then just gently press them down. Those last couple, just gently press them onto the soil. The last thing I do when I plant seeds is put a thin layer of vermiculite. The vermiculite helps keep them from drying out, and it also helps prevent that kind of green algae growing on the tops of the seeds. It's a nice layer on top of the seed starting mix there that helps hold in the moisture. So you don't want to have too thick of a layer, but just a nice little layer right there is going to help those seeds germinate, protect that soil a little bit. I think of it as like mulch for my seedlings. Mist that layer, make sure that top layer. And then after I finish planting out the rest of these seedlings, I'm going to put the humidity dome on and take this inside and put it under some lights. I'm planting out some climbing zucchini, a new variety for me. I'm excited to give this one a try. And some pole beans, these rattlesnake and purple pole beans. They should be really pretty. So I love these labels because they will last all season, actually for up to a year or 2 even in the garden. And I found these Sharpie paint pens work really well. Everything else fades by the end of the season. I have a trellis here that I'm going to have this zucchini climb, and I added a little bit of compost to the soil, so I'm going to go ahead and just water that in. Pretty easy to plant. I'm just going to pull back the mulch. I get to that nice soil, make a little hole with my dibber, then put those 2 seeds in there, cover them up, and put that mulch back in place. Put my seeds in place. Cover it up, put the mulch. And I'll put my sign in so that I know that I've planted here. Pole beans are one of my favorite types of beans. They love to climb, and you get a lot of beans from each plant. I'm going to plant the beans right along the edge here so they can find this trellis. Push the mulch back on top. I'm going to pull back all of this mulch and see what's going on in this worm bin. So these food scraps have mostly broken down, and so what I'm going to do is go ahead and spread this compost and castings. So I've spread the worm castings from my vermicomposting bin and some additional worm castings all over this bed, and now I'm going to water all of it in. I have vermicomposting bins in all of my beds, and I only had to add worms once. The worms will find their way to this bin, I promise. So the first thing I'm going to do when I refresh a bin is to add some shredded cardboard. I like to fill it about halfway full, maybe even a little bit more, with that cardboard. And then I'm going to wet it down. So So I've got some food scraps here. Gonna add those in. And worms are gonna turn all of this food scraps that would have gone to waste into vermicompost for my garden, into worm castings. So I've got that in there. And then I'm gonna put those wood chips back on top. When I can see that this level has gone down, then I'll know it's time to add more scraps. Trellis netting is a trick I borrowed from flower farmers. It's the easiest way to stake those flowers that grow tall and keep them from topping over. Last season I had lisianthus growing here. This season I'm adding snapdragons to this bed, and they will grow up through this trellis netting and have plenty of support. I started these snapdragons indoors on July 3rd. So they've been growing indoors and now they are ready to plant. So I want to allow 1 square per plant. I don't mind if I'm mixing these up. I don't mind having a variety growing here. So I've already added my worm castings. So all I'm gonna do is pull back the mulch, put that in my hand. Oh, look at those roots. They look good. Put that in. Firm the soil around the plant and then put the mulch back. So we'll do this with all the plants. You can see why it's important to not have your beds be any wider than 4 feet. That way you can reach in on all sides without having to step on your beds. When these were growing inside and got 6 to 8 inches tall, I pinched each one back right above 2 sets of leaves, and that's going to encourage a lot of lower branching in these. Snapdragons are a beautiful cut flower and last a long time in the vase. There's nothing like a morning spent with hands in the dirt and dreaming of the beautiful things that are to come. The yummy food that's gonna grow, the beautiful flowers that are gonna bloom, and all of the joy that will come from just a few seeds planted with a whole lot of hope when I start a garden. Especially after a summer like we've had, when it's been just so hot, and I've looked through past pictures of my garden, and it's hard for me to believe that it will ever look like that again. But just planting these out and dreaming of what it'll look like in the spring gives me a lot of hope. Turning on the water to water these plants in. So when you plant, it's also a good time to just take a look at the watering and make sure that everything is working as it should. Make sure we've got good water coming out, but not too much. Give these a nice soak. These snapdragons may grow tall enough that they'll need an additional layer of trellis netting. And if they do, no big deal. I'll just put an additional layer on all of these poles, and then they'll grow up all the way through. You've seen what grew well in my garden this summer. Let me know in the comments what your summer champions were. Thank you so much for watching.